Hi everyone. Have you ever been in a conversation and suddenly forgotten the right word in English? It happens to all of us, and it can feel awkward. But the good news is, it doesn't have to stop the conversation. In today's video, I'll show you how I handle these situations in different scenarios, whether I'm with friends, giving a speech, or talking to a neighbor. I'll share some of my experiences and tips on how to keep the conversation flowing when I forget a word. Let's get started. So, this was during a casual conversation with some coworkers. We were brainstorming ideas for a new project, and I was trying to explain something really important. I started my sentence confidently, like, we need to. And then, poof. The word I wanted just disappeared from my brain. You know that awkward moment when your brain goes blank. That was me, sitting there like a deer in headlights. The word I was looking for was elaborate. I wanted to say something like, we need to elaborate on this idea, but no matter how hard I tried, the word just wasn't coming to me. And I didn't want to sit there awkwardly, fumbling for it, because, let's be honest, that just makes things worse. But then I thought, wait a second. I don't need the exact word. I just need a word that means the same thing. So, instead of stressing out, I took a deep breath and said, we need to explain this idea more. And you know what? Everyone understood me perfectly. No one even noticed that I had forgotten the word, elaborate. That's when it hit me. Synonyms are lifesavers. They don't have to be fancy or complicated. They just have to work. And ever since that moment, I've made it a habit to think of simpler words or phrases I can use if I ever forget something. For example, if I can't remember, implement, I'll just say, use, or, start. If I blank on, comprehend, I'll say, understand. It's like having a backup plan for your brain. And the best part, it keeps the conversation flowing. No awkward pauses, no panicking, just smooth communication. Now, let me tell you something else that might surprise you. Using simpler words isn't just a learner thing. Native speakers do it too. Like, think about it. How often do you hear someone casually say, elaborate, in everyday conversations? Most of the time, people just say, explain, or talk about. So, there's no need to feel embarrassed about not knowing the fancy word. Communication is all about getting your message across. Whether you use, elaborate, explain, or even, talk about it more, the goal is the same. And honestly, most people appreciate it when you keep things simple. But what if the word you forgot doesn't even have a synonym? Don't worry, that's when describing the word becomes your best friend. So, let me tell you about this one time when I completely blanked on a word in the middle of a conversation. Here's what happened. I was out with a couple of friends, and we got caught in a sudden downpour. I mean, the rain came out of nowhere, and we didn't have any cover. As we were running to find shelter, one of my friends casually asked, why don't people carry one of those things? Now, I knew what she was talking about. She meant an umbrella, but for some reason, my brain just refused to cooperate. I could picture it perfectly in my mind, foldable, usually black, keeps you dry, but the word just wouldn't come out. At first, I panicked a little. You know that moment when you're trying so hard to recall something, and the harder you try, the worse it gets. Yeah, that was me. But instead of freezing up, I decided to describe what I was thinking. I said something like, "Oh, you know, it's that thing you use when it's raining. It opens up, and you hold it over your head to stay dry." And just like that, my friend got it. She said, "Oh, you mean an umbrella." We both laughed, and the conversation kept going as if nothing happened. No awkward silence, no judgment, just a simple solution to a common problem. That moment really stuck with me because it showed me that you don't always need to know the exact word to communicate. Describing what the word does or how it's used is often enough for people to understand you. Since then, I've used this trick in so many situations. Like, there was another time when I forgot the word thermometer. Instead of giving up, I just said, "It's that thing you use to check your temperature when you're sick." And guess what? It worked perfectly. This strategy is especially useful for words that don't have an easy synonym. For example, you might forget the word charger, but you can still say, "It's the thing you plug into your phone to give it power." People will understand you, and you'll avoid that awkward pause where you're struggling to remember the word. And if someone helps you out by saying the word you were looking for, don't feel embarrassed. Instead, thank them and store that word in your mental vocabulary bank for next time. But what if your brain just stops? You know, like when you're mid-sentence, and suddenly the word you need decides to take a vacation. Well, here's what I do: I pause and think. Pausing can feel awkward, right? Like, "Oh no, what will the other person think?" But here's the thing, most of the time, they won't even notice. A quick pause is completely normal. In fact, even native speakers do it all the time. I remember this one time when I was presenting a small project in class. I was explaining this chart, super confident, and then bam, my mind went blank. The word I needed was accurate. I was trying to say, "This data is accurate," but for the life of me, I couldn't think of it. So, I just stopped for a moment. Instead of panicking, I took a breath and let my mind catch up. I didn't rush to fill the silence with random words or noises. I just paused. And guess what? In that split second of calm, the word came to me: accurate. It was like my brain just needed a second to reboot. Since then, I've learned to embrace those little pauses. They're not awkward, they're helpful. It's like giving your brain a chance to search its files and pull out the right word. Plus, pausing makes you seem more thoughtful, like you're carefully considering your words, which is never a bad thing. And here's another trick: while you're pausing, you can use a filler phrase to buy yourself a little time. Things like, "Let me think, how do I put this, what's the word I'm looking for?" Or even a simple, can make the silence feel natural. People won't even realize you're buying time to think. I've started using this trick in casual conversations, too. Like, when I'm chatting with friends or coworkers and I blank on a word, I'll just pause and think. It's so much better than fumbling for random words that don't make sense or stressing myself out. When all else fails, and I just can't find the word no matter how hard I try, I do the simplest thing ever: I ask for help. Honestly, this is one of the most underrated strategies, and it works like a charm. I've learned over time that people are generally happy to help you out, especially if they see you're trying. Here's how it usually goes for me. Imagine I'm in the middle of a conversation, and I've hit a mental block. I'll just pause for a second and say something like, "What's the word for?" And then I'll try to describe it. Like one time, I was trying to remember the word substitute. My brain just went blank. So, I said, "What's the word for when you use something instead of something else?" The person I was talking to immediately said, "Oh, you mean substitute." And just like that, I was back on track. Another thing I do is guess the word, especially if I know a similar one. I might say, "Do you mean?" and then throw out a word that's close in meaning. For example, if I'm trying to remember regret, I might say, "Do you mean something like feeling sorry or bad about something?" Most of the time, the other person will either confirm it or help me find the exact word I need. I think there's this unnecessary pressure we put on ourselves to always get it right, but here's the truth, even native speakers forget words sometimes. I've seen it happen. And you know what they do? They ask for help or laugh it off. There's no shame in admitting, "Hey, I'm stuck here, can you help me out?" It's actually a great way to connect with people because it shows you're human and willing to learn. There have been so many times in my life when I've been completely stuck in the middle of a conversation, unable to recall the right word. You know, that moment when you're racking your brain, and nothing comes up. That's when I remind myself of one simple rule: keep it simple. One time, I was in a meeting at work, trying to explain a project update. I wanted to say, "The negotiation went smoothly," but for the life of me, I couldn't remember the word negotiation. My brain froze. It was like the word had completely disappeared. So instead of panicking, I took a step back and rephrased it. I said, "We talked about it, and we reached an agreement." And guess what? Everyone understood me perfectly. The thing about simplifying your sentences is that it takes the pressure off. You don't need to use fancy or complicated words to make your point. At the end of the day, communication is all about being understood, not impressing people with your vocabulary. I think the key is to focus on the message, not the words. If you can't find the perfect word, use the words you do know to say the same thing in a simpler way. For example, instead of saying, "He's a courageous man," you could say, "He's very brave." Or instead of saying, "The explanation was insufficient," just say, "It wasn't enough." This approach has saved me so many times, especially when I'm nervous. It's like giving yourself permission to not be perfect, and that's such a relief. You're not writing a thesis, you're just having a conversation. Sometimes when I'm talking and a word just slips my mind, I'll use a placeholder word. You know, something like thing, stuff, or situation. It sounds simple, but it works wonders. For instance, imagine I'm having a conversation with a friend about cooking. I might be trying to describe a specific ingredient or kitchen tool, but the word just won't come to me. Instead of awkwardly fumbling around, I'll just say something like, "Can you pass me that thing over there?" Or, "I need that stuff for the dish." It helps me keep the conversation going without getting stuck on one word. And here's the thing, it's totally okay. These placeholders are like little lifebuoys when you're lost at sea. They're a way to buy time and continue talking without the pressure of finding the perfect word. The best part, you can always clarify later. For example, I could say, "Oh, I meant the garlic press," or, "I was talking about the spoon, not the fork." It's not about being perfect with every word. it's about getting your message across and keeping the flow going. And finally, there's one more trick I always rely on: learning some common phrases that can help when I forget a word. Here are some common phrases you can use when you forget a word. 1. It's on the tip of my tongue. 2. I can't think of the word right now, but it means. 3. What's the word? 4. Let me think for a second. 5. It's like, you know, the thing that. 6. I'm trying to remember the word. 7. It's that thing that. 8. It's kind of like. 9. I'm blanking on the word. 10. I can't recall the word, but. These phrases help you keep the conversation going while you gather your thoughts. So, that's how I deal with those moments when I forget a word in English. Remember, it happens to everyone, and the most important thing is not to stress. The more relaxed you are, the more likely the word will come to you. Keep practicing, stay calm, and have fun with the process.